very modern buses. Others, PKP Cargo was privatized. It's a kind of company similar to Cefere Marfa, second biggest freight carrier in Europe. So yes, this is a kind of strategy of the government to promote those companies, and I think with some quite successful results. Then I will take the question about 16+1 format. Here we approach this initiative from the very pragmatic, let's say, perspective. We think that it is useful. Definitely it allows us to create kind of exclusive format for our cooperation, countries of our region with China. We prefer not to create too many institutions within this format, rather to have flexible architecture, but those, let's say, centers, those initiatives that were implemented, they seems to be effective, and you mentioned think tanks, also about promotion of agriculture, tourism, energy, dialogue, small and medium-sized enterprises, so transportation, infrastructure. Those issues were discussed on the level of prime ministers during the first meeting in Warsaw, second in Bucharest, third in Belgrade, and the next meeting that will take place in China. So we are actively involved, although, as I said, we kind of evaluate this format according to the achieved results. I don't think that we can, next question from the floor, that I see some conflicting interests of United States and Europe in the field of security. I think what we experience, maybe to a certain degree because of the Ukrainian crisis, is the return of United States to Europe, particularly to the Central and Eastern Europe. And it is in our interest, at least Poland and Romania, but I think all the European countries, to keep Americans present and engaged. So nobody else can play this important stabilizing role as a kind of external balancing power in Europe. And the recent tendency of Russian aggressive policy vis-à-vis its neighbors, it only confirms the necessity to have strong American footprint in Europe. Although the idea of EU army is not a new one, we should see first some details of this proposal. But as you may know, Poland very actively promoted the idea of strengthening common defense and security policy of the European Union, especially during our EU presidency in 2011. Because of the, let's say, different approaches of some important EU players, let's say we achieved modest results with our initiative, but certain process is ongoing in the European Union. Consolidation of efforts, certain institutions were created within this framework of common security and defense policy. This issue will be discussed during the June summit of the EU with some, let's say, specific proposals. My feeling is that this is not the right time for experiments. So we better devote entire our energy to strengthening of the existing alliance that we have, NATO, that is providing security guarantees, that is having some elements of the joint forces, and implementation of the Newport Summit will even strengthen this rapid reaction capability of NATO. European army, I think it's a very nice, but I think still quite idealistic idea. And we should ask ourselves what is the added value. Because so far what we see, I don't know if you are familiar with the concept of battle groups, EU battle groups. What we see is that the same military units are, yes, devoted, are kind of listed into the among the contributions to EU battle groups and to NATO, for example, NATO response forces. So it's among the countries that possess significant military potential. I think there is no need for additional duplication. Those countries that remain outside of NATO, within European Union, they and possess significant military capabilities. I can mention Sweden, for example. They already established quite intensive framework of cooperation with NATO. They are just formally not members of NATO, but the level of cooperation, they have this code name strategic partners, non-NATO strategic partners, is extremely intensive, and also bilaterally with some NATO members like Poland. So bilaterally we have defense cooperation with Sweden that exceeds by far our defense bilateral cooperation with majority of NATO member states. This is what I can tell you with some level of knowledge on my side. So as I said, better we improve and strengthen existing interests rather than make some nice but quite distant in reality projects. I will speed up a little bit, with your permission. Impact of the 2008-2009 economic crisis. Yes, we really managed to avoid the recession during those years, but it was also some slowdown. It affected in particular those areas, sectors of economy that were exposed, let's say, to the situation in the Eurozone. So, were like suppliers, for example, of some producers in Eurozone. But a kind of shock absorption happened especially in the sector of small and medium-sized enterprises. They were able to quickly adapt to the changing circumstances. Even with some slowdown in the economy, we managed to quite quickly redirect our export. And those figures that you show, they I think confirm that kind of raise in productivity helped us, and reduction of costs helped us to survive economically. What instruments were used? For example, we liberalized temporary the labor code legislation. For example, calculation of labor hours. We also make it more easy to terminate the labor contracts. We introduced the possibility of having, let's say, contracts that were part-time jobs or jobs that didn't require kind of probation period. So there were many measures related to the labor legislation, but also we tried to speed up the investments from the budget, from the EU funds, and it was a kind of pillow or buffer that helped us to avoid severe consequences for the economy. So actually, during those years, it was the peak of the EU absorption, and 2008, 2010, especially in the field of infrastructure investments. Then capabilities here with NATO and European Army. I think I answered this question. Eastern Partnership, yes, it's a kind of dilemma, how to keep the mobilization in the Eastern European countries. At the same time, we hear some voices that this Eastern Partnership somehow now is losing its momentum. So we need to really reinvigorate this process during and after Riga summit to have a kind of new energy. And I think that some elements are already visible on the table. So visa liberalization, I think even if it is difficult to think about visa waiver for Ukraine, today we can mark some progress here at least. The same with Georgia, and I think implementation of the association agreement, so the progress in the ratification, for example, but also pressure on Ukraine to prepare themselves for this postponed implementation of the AA and the CFTA. This is something that is within our reach, and kind of differentiation between those 6 countries. Yes, so we have to face reality. There are countries that are not eager and ready to move further. We need to have some offer for Belarus, for example. Yes, more structured dialogue, some projects that are possible to be implemented together with Belarusians. We see some opening from Minsk in recent months, maybe in the context of Ukrainian crisis, so they see some value in direct contacts with the European Union. Azerbaijan is also signaling some readiness to have a kind of selective, yes, progress in some areas, although we know that maybe human rights situation is not making required progress. So I think this is the kind of dilemma. Keep certain unity, cohesion within this program, implement some differentiation, and keep this more for more principle. We expect more in return for more assistance and privileges. Tauscher-Ivanov report. I think this is a quite complicated subject to be covered within a few minutes, but I think that the level of solidarity within EU demonstrated after illegal annexation of Crimea is remarkable. And what is important to keep this solidarity alive and to strengthen this solidarity. I think Russia is doing everything what is possible to divide EU member states. But even the decisions of the EU summit in March, they show that we are still able to maintain the necessary unity and adopt common and far-reaching decisions like the extension of the sanction regime. And this is kind of source of optimism for the future. So I prefer not to focus on some isolated visits, declarations, or intentions, rather to see the broader picture. We know that 28 countries, they don't necessarily have identical views, but we are still able, and this is very encouraging, to maintain the necessary required level of unity and common approach. So I know this report by Atlantic Council. You have, I think, to somehow take into account the personalities of the authors, and you know what I mean. Yes. So I can, to balance this, send you another report presented 2 months ago by the same Atlantic Council, but with different authors. Okay?
And different conclusions, I
With
suppose.
slightly different conclusions. So I will stop here, but only the question of General Grumas. Last month we marked the anniversary of the Polish-Romanian Defense Convention signed in 1921. That was a selective alliance because it was directed against only one potential enemy. It was a very important element of the organization, geopolitical organization of the intermarium during the time between two world wars. I think it passed the test during those years. But today I think we have in place strongest military alliance that ever existed, NATO. I think it would be quite adventurous to create some alliances within alliance. Everything that can strengthen this alliance, we are talking about this trilateral format, Poland, Romania, Turkey. So a kind of starting point of this format is we are doing only those things that are strengthening alliance, not dividing alliance. And this is a kind of guiding principle that I think should stay as our central point. Yes, I think Poland and Romania de facto, no matter what are the pillars of stability and security in this region between Baltic Sea and Black Sea. This is certain responsibility, but I think also kind of subject for reflection for the future. So the role of the think tanks here is essential. So I'm looking forward to read those next reports that will be presented in coming months. Also the visit of President Iohannis was commented by some experts in Poland, in Romania. So we need some kind of intellectual basis, yes, to fully understand the situation and the expected role, positive role of our countries. Internal politics in Poland and potential impact on Polish-Romanian relations. I think that there will be, even if there will be change after the autumn elections in Poland, in the composition of the governing coalition, I think there will be no major shifts in our foreign policy, especially vis-à-vis Romania. You have to remember that this strategic partnership was signed in 2009 by late President Lech Kaczyński, was originally from the Law and Justice Peace Party, and it was taken over by his successor, Bronisław Komorowski, and I don't see any difference in approach vis-à-vis Romania from two main political parties. And in Poland you have the same parties in the government since 2007, so it's remarkable level of continuity and predictability. And according to the recent opinion polls, the composition of the parliament will be almost identical after the elections, with maybe some small minor corrections. So don't expect a kind of tectonic shift like in Greece. No. Thank you.
Your Excellency, thank you very much for your questions. Mr. Orban, would you like to comment on any of the things having been said here?
So I will be extremely brief because I fully share the opinions of His Excellency. So it's concerning the European Army, concerning the consolidation of NATO, and what we are doing in terms of informal alliances are within the EU and NATO is only in order to strengthen both institutions and not to imagine other alliances and so on. I would like just to answer to a question concerning the relation between the European Union and the so-called Euro-Asian Union. It's very difficult to answer to such kind of question because we don't know what will happen and how this union, I'm talking about Euro-Asian Union, will look in the near future. So we don't know if there will be just a free trade area or there will be something different, how this union will function, if there will be equality among the members composing this union, and so on and so on. So it's too early to discuss. Of course, there are member states, there are stakeholders in the European Union saying that let's think about now about how we will, we can have relations with this union. But once again, we are talking about something which doesn't exist. Let's see what will happen, how this union will look, and then, of course, we will see if the relations will exist or not. But what I would like to tell you in this context is that on long term, what happened in Ukraine will affect significantly the Russian Federation. Because there is not only the question of sanctions. And from this point of view, I would like to insist on the fact that on sanctions, there was and there is unity. Yeah? There is, in the last European Council, there is a very clever sentence in the conclusions saying, making a link between the duration of the sanctions and the implementation of Minsk Agreement. And the implementation of Minsk Agreement can be assessed fully by the end of this year. So it means that informally or in a certain way, the sanctions will be prolonged at least till the end of this year. So it's now more than clear that the decision of the sanction of prolonging the sanction at least till the end of the year will be not taken at the level of the leaders, at the level of the European Council, but at the level of the Council or even of the ambassador in Coreper. But on long term, once again, Russia will be affected, not only because of the sanctions, because of the fact that the Union will have really internal market in the energy sector, will have a real energy union, and in the dependence on the Russian gas will decrease significantly on long term. Also, the very advanced technology from West will no longer go like in the past, like it happened for the future. And I think that this partnership which was considered as very reliable by the whole Union for a long period of time, this is no longer seen by everybody in the Union as being viable on long term. Yeah? Because, of course, there are still different opinions. For example, I read recently the resume of debate in the Belgian Parliament. And the huge majority of the members of the Belgian Parliament said that these Eastern European and Central and Eastern European countries are pushing the Union in a very dangerous position, in being very conflictual with Russia. Of course, we have to explain them why we have these reasons, why we are acting like this. So there is still differences of assessment in the different member states. But beyond this, what we can notice is that the Union is acting united and will act united. Of course, it's in the near future. So this is why I said that the big loser on long term will be Russia, not the European Union.
Distinguished speakers, Mr. Rector, dear guests, on behalf of the National University of Political Studies and Public Administration and on behalf of the European Institute of Romania, let me thank you all for being present here and for contributing to this highly challenging debate. Let me briefly conclude with an idea that I understood from the speech of His Excellency, an idea which I think is highly relevant for Romania, that Poland's success was not spontaneous. It didn't happen by default, by the will of God, by magic, but it was designed and guided by a very coherent and a very committed political leadership with the support of a professionalized public administration. And I think that this is a very, very good lesson for Romania. Your Ambassador, let me share your hope that the strategic partnership between Romania and Poland will go beyond grand political statements and will be brought down to details and practicalities. Thank you very much once again and have a good day. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.